Welcome to Diplomatic Passport. This is Zimpapers Television Network, and I'm Robert Mkundiwa. This is your daily weekday COVID-19 show that keeps you up to date with developments the world over, in the region, and of course, in Zimbabwe. Now, as always, we start by taking a look at Zimbabwe's COVID-19 cases as of the latest data released by the Ministry of Health and Childcare. So Zimbabwe now has 6,559 confirmed cases of coronavirus, including 203 deaths and 5,224 recoveries, which puts the national recovery rate now at 79.9%. 62 new cases have been recorded in the last 24 hours, and these include 51 local transmission cases and 11 returnees from South Africa who have been isolated at the moment. Now, sadly, one death was recorded in the last 24 hours, with Harare still the epicenter, and it has 2,544 cases, followed by Bulawayo, which now has 1,281 cases of the novel coronavirus. So Zimbabwe has been recording a low number of new COVID-19 cases, which gave us a picture of progress. However, 263 Chat reported that the decrease in the new COVID-19 cases could be as a result of the slowed down testing in Zimbabwe because of a testing kits and chemicals shortage. Now, according to the Ministry of Health and Childcare weekly COVID-19 report, quote, testing was decentralized to improve on the turnaround time, but frequent shortages of testing kits and reagents have slowed down the progress made. The number of PCR tests done decreased, with average tests for the week standing at 1,240 as compared to 1,946 from the previous week. We also reported a decrease in the positives this week, 890, as compared to the previous week, which had 2,280, read the report. Now, the question that then comes to mind is that should we reopen schools, for example, when we do not have a clear picture of the extent of COVID-19 infections in the country? In fact, early this morning, somebody wrote to us and said we should look at that big, beautiful figure that we had yesterday of 85% vis-a-vis the testing. Are we testing? And right from the get-go, we've always been saying on this program, there are three things that we need to do and do diligently, and those are testing, testing, testing. Now, we asked this before because yesterday, even the Information Minister, Monica Mchangwa, during a media briefing, said that schools are set to reopen mid-September for examination classes. Now, let's hear what she had to say before we interrogate that further.
The school's opening days are scheduled for 14th September 2020 for Cambridge examination classes and 28th September 2020 for ZIMSEC examination classes. Cabinet approved that the ZIMSEC examinations should start on 1st December 2020.
So that's what the Information Minister said yesterday, but we're still pondering whether that is not too soon or whether we should open at all. Now, in the studio, I'm joined by our ZTN correspondent, Takuzwa Chiambakwe, who is going to help me deliberate on this issue, not least of all because, Takuzwa, you're always in those, or most times you're in those meetings and you hear firsthand, and you always question our leadership with regards to this, and you're a thorn in any side, really. So, opening, we heard of the 14th and the 28th and exam classes having to sit. Just in general, what do you get from that? Do you think we ought to go ahead and do this?
Thanks, Rob, for inviting me on the show. Always a pleasure. I think opening schools is going to be a very debatable issue as long as we are living under the conditions we're living in with COVID-19 in our midst as a society. Because before we even talk about Zimbabwe, let's talk about other countries like South Africa next door. If you see what happened, South Africa reopened schools for grade 7s and 8s back in June, and they had to close midway into July because some teachers and students had contracted the virus. And if you go to the UK, they recently opened their schools, and there's a lot of debate that's happening. So coming back home, one way or the other, schools have to open. Now the question is, how prepared are we as a society for allowing children to go back? So then the issue that has been quite topical between government and teacher unions, for instance, over the past month, has been the issue to say, are we prepared enough?
And are we? Because look, we also have the story that we're talking about right now. We don't have testing kits, we don't have reagents, and when we're possibly at our worst with regards, we've decentralized, but this is our worst period because we are now testing less. And then this is the same time we're thinking, well, why don't we open schools? It's a bit of a no-brainer that we may think, let's not open schools, don't you think?
Well, indeed, I think you're raising a critical issue to say we should not rush it, and that's what everyone is saying, because even the Parliamentary Portfolio
Evidently
Committee,
not the ministry though. Everyone except central government.
Well, they're saying they're taking measures, because if you look at what Minister Mchangwa said last week on the same issue of reopening of schools, they said government continues to check and prepare for the reopening of schools with consultation with different stakeholders. It's the issue to do with consultation with the stakeholders, because if you then talk to the teacher unions, like I'm referring to your two biggest unions in Zimbabwe, the ZIMTA and the PTUZ, they are saying government only spoke to us on Monday for ZIMTA, and government only consulted PTUZ on Tuesday.
And what are they saying? What is PTUZ saying? What is ZIMTA saying at the moment, at least by the last time you actually talked to them?
Well, we spoke to them this afternoon, earlier on in the day. PTUZ is saying that we should go to school only if there is guaranteed safety for the teachers first, because they represent teachers. And then they say also we should ensure that the students that are also going back to school, whether it's exam classes or whoever is going to go back into the classroom, they have to be sure that everyone is going to get tested. And everyone, yes.
So we cannot test because we're talking about reagents, and there's also talk that the government, central government, because of obviously movement and the lack of movement, we've not been able to get as much testing kits as we can. So there's a hindrance there in getting to import testing kits and the like. So technically, if they say only if we can test, and we know we cannot, and that's a no-brainer at the moment. We cannot test. So why are we opening? And so that's PTUZ, of course, and ZIMTA.
ZIMTA is saying the same thing. If you can guarantee the safety of our members, that is the teachers, of course, then let's go ahead, because both parties have been saying over the past couple of 2 months, for instance, August and July, they have been saying that there is a possibility to reopen schools before the year 2020 ends, but only for exam classes. But they're also suggesting that no exams will be written in 2020. Let's talk about exams being written in the year 2021.
Beautiful. Now, you know what that says is there are two different things. Open schools for exam classes, which means somebody was supposed to write in 2020, let's reopen if it's grade 7, Form 4, I would have said Form 2, I'm one of those people who actually did write my ZJC. Form grade 7, Form 4, Form 6, and let's have them study. And they're socially distanced because they've got this whole school to themselves practically, and then have them write in 2021. So that they salvage the year, perhaps in a very ungodly period, probably right in June. Everybody writes in June who ought to have written in November. And that actually seems to make sense, if you ask me. But to then say, let's reopen, and this is what government seems to be saying, let's reopen schools and let's have them write. When was the last time kids were in school?
We last had students going in class in March.
And then all of a sudden they come back and write an exam. Now, when you said, first I'm going to ask whether you attended this particular session yesterday.
No, I didn't manage to attend.
Okay, and this is probably the Great Commission. When you go for the next one, we just want to, common sense will tell you January, February, March was the first term. And then all of a sudden, our kids can sit for an exam in November, it is, or October rather. It's October, right? How is that going to happen? Are these children? Well, some exams are in December, or some suggestions. But even then, are these children genetically modified? That all of it, because I would know, I'll tell you, I cannot study in January, February, and March and sit and then go anxious for a good 6-8 months and then all of a sudden sit and write an examination and perform well.
What you're raising is a very interesting issue. If you follow what's been happening in the UK, you'd find that they've been talking about inequalities that have been developing between your rich students and your poor students.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that's been happening in Zimbabwe. A few months back, Ministry of Education in association with different stakeholders introduced online lessons. They also introduced lessons on radio and TV. So to an extent, students have been getting access to educational material. So it's not like they've been sitting throughout since March to where we are today. The question is, how many of those students were able to access
Radio,
the
television,
content
and
via those platforms? Which is why the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Education had suggested to say, for those students that have been able to access educational material, particularly those people from A schools, they can continue. Because if you've been learning...
And then that's educational apartheid, if you then ask me. Because what we're then saying is some people have been left behind. And what we always say is we should leave no one behind.
Yes.
But also, never mind the fact, access can be one thing. My kids can access education or educational materials or material. But when you're studying or accessing that material, but you've got an uncertainty and you don't know whether you will or will not write, the level of seriousness when you're really, studying or getting that information in is rather different from when because it was undecided. It was just a virtual learning. They're learning in a dark hole and they don't know whether they'll write, whether it shall be tomorrow, it shall be next year. So even those kids, when they were told yesterday that it's on, they can't just switch on a button because they'll think, oh my goodness, I wasn't serious that particular week, or there's a week where we went, or when I fell ill, and I wasn't. Our children have not been as serious as they would had they known that they're absolutely an exam class one, or when they'll be writing, and that's a catastrophe. And when you talked about, I know this is not exactly 1987. But I'll tell you, whenever we would go for weekends, Kambuzumo, we would all go to the window, Kwamaitito, and watch through the window and watch the A-Team on a little corner because we didn't have a television set. So we're talking about resource poverty. And even then, fortunately, over the past couple of months, we haven't been really getting blackouts. But you factor things in like that, loss of power, and then you're listening to the online whatsoever or radio-based lessons, and then boom, they're gone. But even the radio lessons, just last week, people were talking about how they wanted to restructure them so that they're more palatable. Yes. What it means is, even in their form, they're not as perfect as possible, but which we're going to talk about. But just if you're joining us, this is a Diplomatic Passport on St. Papers Television Network, and this is the show that, of course, you're watching. Welcome back. We're with our ZTN correspondent Takuchi Ambakwe, and we're going to be talking about these our pupils who are going to presumably write this year. Now, as a father yourself, Taku, I do know you've got children in waiting who haven't really hit the planet yet. As a parent, as a parent-elect or candidate parent, had you had children, would you send them to school? Would you, whether they're writing an exam in an exam class or not, would you send them back to school when we've got all this uncertainty? And even if they were in an exam class, with all that has happened, you've got this decision to make. Would you send your child to school?
That's a good one, Rob. One way or the other.
Under these circumstances?
Under the circumstances, I would say no, but only if they are able to test the teachers.
But you do know, under the circumstances, We're not able to test
Because
it.
we still have, let's not make it seem as if the 14th or the 28th is tomorrow. Because probably there could be some test kits that could be availed.
And when they
within the
do
window
come,
period. Yes.
and our kids are learning, and then, oh Nelly, we've got 3% of the exam classes positive.
I think what you're raising is an issue which we have seen in the open market space. For instance, just across the road, supermarkets that are that side of the road were closed for about 3 weeks because staff in that supermarket
Had tested
had
positive.
tested positive.
And-
but
and
today it's open and people still go there. So I believe that as long as all nations are still grappling with this pandemic and trying to find solutions, there is no way we can then guarantee that if schools do open, people will not contract the virus. I believe definitely when schools open, we might have teachers that will test positive. We might have students that will test positive. But that's exactly what has been happening. What I would suggest to authorities is for them to ensure that there's strict measures. It's like if you go back in time when this pandemic lockdown started in Zimbabwe, we talked about vegetable markets like Mbari Musika. They were shut down, and then government said, let's reopen. The days when they reopened, there weren't any strict measures of supervision, and then there was an outcry. And then, you know, your local authorities, people in the city council, as well as with your law enforcement agents, came together and tried to put systems in place. But today, if you go back, you find that there's a bit of reluctance.
Laxity, I think.
Yes.
Exactly.
So that's what I would suggest, to say if schools are to open, let's open the schools, because one year or the other, schools have to open and the children have to go back to school. But let's ensure that measures to ensure the safety of teachers and students, we don't get to relax as we are seeing.
Well, I get this. What I don't understand is we close schools in the let's put it into perspective. We close schools in the first quarter of the year. We are now in the last quarter of the year and we want to open schools. Now, this is government and not an NGO. They don't have a gun to their head that says you absolutely have to open schools in 2020. Some governments, some jurisdictions elsewhere have just been resigned to the fact that, you know what, let us recollect. Let us make sure that when we go in December, when people are calmed down and in their spaces, we are accumulating, for example, test kits. And what do? Or even just let's reopen and just have this school distancing and have the exam classes study, and perhaps by March next year, have them right. That seems realistic. There's no gun to government's head, and there's no loss that they will really suffer if by that, you know. If it was an NGO, and government is not an NGO, they would say, oh, we've got this money for this quarter, and it's, if we don't liquidate it and spend it, we can't roll it over into the next year, so we'll suffer a loss. So let's just have a workshop, and let's just buy shoes for, you know, and let's create orphans and draw little pictures of additional. But we're not rushing anywhere. 2020 is absolutely gone. It exists on a calendar, Takuzwa, on a calendar. People are not buying cake for their birthdays because they sit at home for their birthday. We have been resigned to the fact that if you're going to, God forbid, turn 40 in the year 2020, you're not going to have a big bash with friends. It's finished. It's gone.
Well,
Can we not?
Let me come in and say, you're raising a good point, because it's one of the alternatives. I believe it's Kenya that said schools are closed. We're not opening till next year. That's another route that government can take. But we are saying there are options, and because, like I highlighted earlier, this is not something that's affecting Zimbabwe alone. We are not in a vacuum when it comes to the coronavirus issue. So, as I highlighted when we started, there are debates happening in the UK. That's Europe, where it's first world. There are debates happening in South Africa. You know, opposition parties in South Africa were like, don't open schools.
Yeah.
You know, up until certain things
Up until they started
place.
opening the bars, yes.
Exactly. So I think your point is valid, because it's an option that government can take to say, let's shut down shop and let's just focus on 2021. One of the teacher unions, Dr. Sifiso Ndlovu of the ZIMTA, Zimbabwe Teachers Association, had suggested that for exam classes and said, let's forget about it. In 2020, let's forget about exam classes, because we have to also consider that for your A levels and O levels, there's some students that need to take practical tests.
Yeah.
And if they stopped learning in March, that means they haven't been doing practicals. So you need all these months to cover for the time you're supposed to sit for the final exam.
That's why he's a doctor. And I'll tell you this. Well, do you know what we're talking about? Then having gone to school January, February, March. Let's not neglect the fact that January is the last 2 weeks of January.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 8, 9, 10 weeks. And if it were, some of us, that we're talking about less than that, because it's the other 1 week or 2 weeks where you stay at home because you don't have the fees, and then that other week when you're sent back, and the first term is a mess like that. And I like how you're speaking like a politician, and you're obviously spending a lot of time with them. But I want to also speak to something absolutely critical for a child who, and the key word here is mathematics. Math, and I can tell from the look on your face is you're one of those children who cringed when you heard that the maths teacher was coming through, and you were absolutely happy when she cancelled the double period because she was unwell. Mrs. Moyo was my teacher, and she never fell sick, that woman. And God knows, I would pray for her to live a long and fruitful life, but I would also pray for her to get a bug. And why I said mathematics, why I said mathematics is because for dumb kids in mathematics like you and me, we would write mathematics in June and hope when the results come, if it's a C, we're not writing in November. If it's an E, we're like, God, give me the strength. If it's a U, you're like, you can never, there's not enough carnage in the world to deal with that. Or even if it's an E, sometimes you would hold on to it. But where are the June examination results? Because some kids write in June, get that as a marker to know whether to write or not in November. Do they have the results?
Okay, for the record, I didn't have a problem with mathematics. I actually had a problem with woodwork. Okay, so that out of the way. Okay. Yes. Coming to the June examination.
And you can't write woodwork in June, so you didn't have a big problem. Yeah.
Yes. Coming to the June examinations, as of Monday, we spoke to the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Schools Examination Council, ZIMSEC, Professor Eddie Mwenje, and he highlighted that they were good to go for this week.
Sorry?
The first week of, we actually spoke to him on Friday. That's
no, this is September.
Yes. So we spoke to.
In our old normal, by September you will have already gotten your results.
I'm getting.
And you're saying they're good to go where? To disperse the results?
Let me speak.
Okay, I'll let you speak.
Yes. We spoke to Professor Mwenje on Friday.
And
he confirmed that they are going to start the process of marking in the first week of September. Then we asked the question, why? Why is it taking you so long? And his response, unfortunately, I wish we could have played the clip, was that we had delays because of the rise in coronavirus cases in the country. So
we can't mark because there's COVID, but our kids can write because there's COVID.
Well, now let me not speak. Let me not speak for the professor.
Okay.
Let me not speak for the professor. What his case was, because of the spike in cases we witnessed, I think 3-4 weeks ago, we had to stop.
So they had started.
No. They couldn't rush into.
So they just kept sitting. So technically they haven't been marked.
Yes, they haven't marked. Yes, that's on record. As of Friday,
but
they hadn't started.
The spike didn't start at the end of June or July. So technically they could have, had they started marking and then stopped, then we would have known that that's the spike caused. But the spike happened well after they should have started marking.
There is another issue.
Yes, I thought as much. You tell me.
You're rushing. Because once we spoke to the professor, the chairperson of ZIMSEC, we also then spoke to the teachers. And the teachers are arguing and saying, no, we are not participating in the process. The real reason for the June examination results not having come out at the
Expected
usual
time, yeah.
traditional time is simply because there has been an issue between the employer and the employees. That's government and its teachers. In this case, ZIMSEC oversees the marking.
Yeah.
Professor Mwenje said they're not changing the markers. They're using the seasoned markers. So that means they're talking to the same teacher who is represented by the teacher unions who are saying we need a review of our salaries before we go back into the classroom. And we are also talking about marking. So both unions said the issue is not really about the spike in cases. The issue is about teachers really not happy with going into a job of marking without knowing what they're getting, because they were talking about we need to know what we're getting before we start the job, and we also need to know if there's a risk allowance.
Fair enough.
So what has government done? Last week, part one, we spoke to the Minister of Social Welfare and Public Service, Professor Mavima, who highlighted that they were starting the negotiations for salaries. They were supposed to have started them 2 weeks ago.
And they didn't, because apparently there was COVID somewhere as
Yes,
well.
at the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah.
So
we haven't started.
no. So what we've gathered
have the
so far.
negotiations started?
No, they haven't.
Okay.
What we've gathered so far, but it's not yet on record, but what we've picked up in the system is that the negotiations are supposed to start next week.
And if COVID spikes next week. So with all this uncertainty, we still have this poor pupil who's got who's in mental purgatory, doesn't know what the result was because it hasn't even been marked, and doesn't know whether to write or not to write, who may sit and write that mathematics poor Robert, and it turns out he gets an E in November, but had gotten a C in June, but cannot use the C because it has been superseded.
But let me just come in. Government never said students are writing examinations. Well, let me talk about ZIMSEC, because I cannot speak for Cambridge, because that's a whole different institution. For ZIMSEC, Professor Mwenje is on record since, this is September now, since June, he's been saying students can only be tested if they've finished the syllabus. So, as far as ZIMSEC is concerned, students are only fit to sit for exams once they've finished the syllabus. So I think what government is trying to do is to get the ball rolling.
Get the ball rolling.
Yes.
Now, what I want you to do, Takuzo, you're coming back in next week, because I think it's fair enough to have this discussion with the actual affected people, and also perhaps bring in a child psychologist to then also look at what this means to the mental psyche for pupils. Because I do know I would sometimes even dream of myself writing an essay the day before I write a particular exam, because that's what anxiety does to you. That's what I wouldn't dream of, and then I would have a blank dream at the day before the maths exam, because technically that's what I would be doing the next day, to be blank. So that's. We need them here at the at the table, at the ZTN table, to also speak from their angle, so that we really talk about this, because it's a very serious thing, especially for those who we're playing Russian roulette with. And this is really Russian roulette for the kids.
Yeah, well, for the children, when we last went for a parliamentary portfolio committee for the education committee, the child president, the Speaker of Parliament, junior parliamentarians actually came in, and they also given oral evidence alongside with different stakeholders. And the children said, we are not willing. This was before the June exams. They said they were not willing. And
then they were forced to write. They were not willing, we forced them to write. They may be not willing, we'll probably force them to write. But that's all the time we have for today, because right now, to close us off, we want to turn to at least some nice story of 7 million people, the strongest people in Zimbabwe, I would like to say. It's a story of Elias Pedzisai Monda, who's a passionate supporter of arguably the biggest football club in Zimbabwe. I'll not name it. You will probably just guess whatever you think it is. You'll see in this clip. And ironically, this guy, Monda, is now the bus driver for that beautiful big club. He used to lead them in cheer. now he leads them on behind the steering wheel, and this is a tale of his journey with his team. And he said that he would walk from Chitungwiza when he was a young kid to some areas to follow football and whatsoever, to watch his favorite team in play. And let's see what his favorite team is, and let's see his beautiful story. This is Elias Pedzisai Monda, the bus driver for Dynamis Football Club. Arguably Zimbabwe's biggest and certainly the country's most successful football club. There is not enough silver polish in the world to polish the amount of silverware that their proud trophy cabinet adorns over half a century of excellence on the pitch. Unsurprisingly, Monda, from a tender age, would walk over 25 kilometers in worn-out little shoes to catch a glimpse of his favorite team, nicknamed the Glamour Boys, in action. There his young eyes beheld footballing wizardry from pitch gods in a legend that produced players in the past like Sam Dawia and the inimitable genius of George Mastermind Shire, amongst other legendary players. Not that he could afford it, as the marshals would open the gates in the last 15 minutes of the game to ease the congestion in the post-match exit, and Monda and others would use the opportunity to watch free of charge the dying embers of the game.
Ndizouya kuDynamos ndaisapota Dynamos zvekuti taikwanisa kutofamba netsoka kubva kuChitungwiza kuuya kuRufaro tisikuona maDynamos pamwe tozopinda bhora rakutopera painzi zifa yakuvhura magedhi tobva tazopinda pa15 minutes dzemahara idzodzo tozodzokera kuChitungwiza.
But in the year 2014, his boyhood dream was somewhat realized. He was shocked when he was called in to become his beloved team's bus driver.
Ndakazoshamisika ndichitodaidzwawo kuti 2014 takawina League Cup naPasua. 2015 takati ndiana Ndiraya tizvo chatakanganwa ndiani, then Lloyd Mtasa takaita second runner.
Today, when traveling across Zimbabwe with the new generation of Dynamis players, Monda says he always advises them to be respectful and to maintain the discipline their predecessors, like Shire, were famed for. The Dynamis players see him not only as a driver, but as a mentor and father figure, who is at times very strict and does not tolerate any mischief. The players speak of their mentor's strictness.
He's more than a father to us. Above all, Mdarari smart, Basmaga, Adisina.
And I want to Baba Chewe was Hawaii Ashani, Anachawanuti, and encourage Takashata. This one was good cities like you can take up in Ambazi, Utaroti, Sumas, Belsi, Sadese, Safambi family, Sakanimara and window, and with Chiba Jenny, they can like Chibabu, Blawayo. No, I'm good to encourage Zanaga. Madam Daro, I'm going to too.
Tete Monda ndinowa describe sababa. Zvira kutanga kuya kuDynamos kunoku pane rudo nevanhu ende munhu anofara. Anoda zvema jokes mukapinda mubhazi anomboita kunge ari serious. But pamwe pacho zvingori zve2 minutes mubhazi make hadi munhu anoita mafanisi. Anoda munhu anoita zvinhu mukapinda mubhazi garai pasiti penyu. Hadi kunetsana nemunhu kuona munhu anenge ari pasiti akamira mupaseji hadi.
He is also father to one of Zimbabwe's top award-winning gospel hip-hop artists, popularly known as Mudiwa Hood. From being a football-worshipping little teen, he now literally has the lives of the players of Zimbabwe's biggest team in his hands, driving them to where their dreams dare to conquer. For ZTN News, I'm Robert Nkondiwa. I don't know. This is a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story of being absolutely committed to your childhood team, and look at him, he's now the bus driver. But the story was so beautifully told. Of course, it's my voice, but that's besides the point. But that story is a beautiful story from start to finish, and people are seeing how committed somebody can be to a football club. But all Takuzwa Chihambakwe here could snicker about is to actually know that this committed person to football is actually supposed to be Mudiwa Hood's father.
Yeah, was shocked. I didn't know his father was a stone.
But you're friends with him. You could have called and asked him.
I didn't know. I didn't know. Yeah, there's stuff you don't know about everyone. You know. Yeah.
So maybe that's another thing that we're going to send you through for. Bring us the story. Tell it. Let's hear if Mdiwa also supports Dad's Football Club,
yeah.
and let's also hear stories of him and how he may have been groomed into loving his dad's beloved club. That's another beautiful
definitely.
diary.
I'll just grab my diplomatic
Passport,
and I'll be
absolutely.
out.
So you've got
But-
your diplomatic passport is valid for another week. Give us answers on our pupils. You're going to be in studio with us when the pupils come. You give hell to government and get us answers, and also talk to Mdiwa Hood.
Definitely.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure having you here. Takudzwa, the gentleman was walking from Chitungwiza to Rufaro Stadium. You walk from Chitungwiza to ZTN. That's how committed you are. That's Takudzwa Chambakwe. He's an absolute gem. Now keep your contributions coming to my Twitter handle at Zimrobbie, ZIMROBBIE, and my email address robinkondiwa@gmail.com. So from me, Robin Kondiwa, and from Takudzwa Chambakwe, who acknowledges that Kudara in television, people as dark as me and him would not be in front of the camera. Look at us. We made it, Mom. And thank you to all of you guys. And Bama Tindike, Tapioma Tindike, who is my TD today. Thank you all for staying at home and staying safe. Have a great night and see you tomorrow.